The Yom Kippur War began on Yom Kippur, Saturday, October 6, 1973, 14 o'clock. Unexpectedly, two powerful attacks, the Syrian Golan Heights and the Egyptian half, Sinai. The war lasted 18 days. Israel began breaking, and then, this attack against Israel transferred the war deep into enemy territory, forcing the Egyptians, followed by the Syrians, to termination arrangements, new fire. Israel completely surprised, but not equally in both arenas. While the Egyptians were able to deceive the Israeli intelligence, representing the Syrian concentration's huge forces military exercises, the Israeli intelligence northern spotted the Syrian army concentration's Hourani, treated them more seriously. This is due to the fact that 3 weeks earlier, after a chase aircraft, another Syrian fighter plane, Israeli air battle took place over the Mediterranean, which shot down 13 planes, Syrian fighter, and Israeli fighter plane. The pilot was rescued. Syrian forces were concentrated in preparation for retaliation. Therefore, the Minister of Defense, Moshe Dayan, 7th Armored Brigade transfers Sheva to the Golan Heights for the end of September. Jordan has not joined the war against anxiety precedent 6-day war. Both the Israeli and Arab armies stood out the large amount of weapons. Centralized operation of thousands of anti-tank missiles terms of type Sager by the Egyptian army. Tactical sophistication was surprised the IDF in the West Sinai. Mediation means heavy water crossing barriers were added to the IDF, and the Egyptian army was a prominent technical innovation armies inland. Outstanding technical innovation: Israeli Air Force fighter jets were American bomb, but the most significant revolution took place in the Navy. He had the ship's missile boat, which enabled him to nature during the war of the first 8 boats Syrian and Egyptian missile, and hit 3 missile boats more enemies. Operational achievement: it gave the performance tactical naval, and gave Israel freedom of navigation and commercial operations in the western Mediterranean. Worth mentioning the control of Marine Navy's Bay, Suez, and the North Sea. The end. Chinese arena: Egyptians succeeded in crossing the Suez Canal by the 5 infantry divisions between Israeli strongholds, were hardly manned. Motivate them to walk to the depth of the line near the Israeli strongholds. None. Busy. Prepare for a night to absorb attacks against the IDF's armored, and start setting up 11 major crossing bridges for armor, anti-aircraft missiles, and artillery. Egyptians. Arena: Syrian Golan Heights were blocked central scene, but were unable to capture an IDF outpost on Mount Hermon, to break through Ahaznia, Tel Fairs, and penetrate the southern Golan and Neck Golan Israeli center. On the night of 7th to the 6th of October evacuated all Jewish settlements from the Golan Heights. On the morning of October 7th, reserve forces began to arrive. The scene of the Golan Heights were 2 divisions, commanded by Brigadier General Raphael Iden and General Dan Kandel. IDF's main effort focused on breaking and repelling the Syrian Golan Heights. Air Force focused its operations against the enemy Syria, while also launched Armored Division of General Moshe Dayan into battle in the Golan Heights. Reflection: that should turn completely level, the Golan Heights was sent Hambar Hart to Northern Command on October 8. Full cooperation with the Northern Command Yitzhak Coast, it became clear that contact the Golan Heights and finalized plan attack counterpelled division of the Southern Golan Heights, in coordination with the division Candle. Attack, counter of 2 divisions, together with the force, air, removing the Syrian army suffered heavy losses. Ethan Division also checked the pressure Syrians Kunitra. In those days, 8th to the 10th of October, there were at the scene of the Suez Canal 2 attacks against the division, ended in dismal failure. Southern Command, Shmuel Gonen, landed the Champions Armor Division SIL, attack against Hasty towards the northern sector of the canal. The attack was halted and repulsed, with heavy losses. Then the day before catching the smaller armored units of the IDF in their attempts to get to some of the strongholds, the IDF besieged were manned in part by the infantry, but the lesson still is appreciated. Following the collapse of the Chief of Staff Division Bern, Lt. General David Eleazar, to stop the attacks, these countermeasures, and wait for the moment's strategic effort by the IDF offensive Syrian arena copied Egyptian arena. Though, the General Sharon also decided to start a similar attack armored division, following the October 9th in order to extract the infantry in points in the figure. This attack also failed badly. Appeal of the Syria's command and control in the Southern Command brought the High Command political, military recruit immediately Malti, General Haimbar, Hart, and give him the supreme command of every seen war against Egypt, in the north half, the Sinai Peninsula, while Major General Shmuel Gonen has served as deputy. The first report of the Bar, that GHQ next October 10th was that the IDF returned to himself. To this point, vacated or surrendered all strongholds, IDF staffed line the Suez Canal, the southern outpost BMZH alone, surrendered on October 13th, and the area Budapest Northern lasted until the end of the war. Had earlier was put in South Chinese, under the separate command of Major General Yishai Yugavish. October 9th day was the deepest crisis in the war. Attack, counter-dialogue, IDF's Division Golan Heights is not yet complete, and completely failed Chinese scene to attacks against division. On October 10, the IDF completed attackers against repel the Syrian army from all over the Golan Heights, Mount Hermon outpost left alone yet by the Syrians. Israeli High Command decided to continue to counter-attack a real threat to Damascus, hoping that the Syrians would agree to a ceasefire. On Saturday the 12th of October, after the Syrians, with the Iraqi army managed to stop the IDF attack on the Golan, about 30 kilometers south of Damascus, introduced Malti, General Haimbar, Hart, Canal Scene Commander, Suez, to the Supreme Command plan cross the Suez Canal. While presenting the plan and approved, it appears that the Egyptians began to move most of their armored reserves to the east bank of the canal. On the morning of October 14th, they launched an attack includes the full width of the arena between the Mediterranean Sea and the Gulf, Suez. Their intention was to move 50-40 kilometers east and take over the line. Transitions, Romani, Tash, Majid, cancelled. Till afternoon, IDF forces managed to block all efforts to the Egyptian offensive and push them into Mazim, protected and fortified adjacent to the canal, Suez, on the east side. Egyptian army lost on this day 250 tanks, compared with 20 tanks lost soldiers. This battle over Israel's defensive phase. On October 15th, the afternoon began to make the crossing canal, Suez. During the first night took Sharon's division head, a small bridge west of the canal. which included 2 battalions of paratroopers, crossed the canal. Boats, assault, and a tank battalion had passed through by boats. Small raft raided a tank company on October 16, 10 miles west of the bridge, and destroyed advance bases of surface Egyptian air. But the division failed to open through the canal to the east. Why not set up the channel the major speaking bridges, which were essential to transport 2 armored divisions, the Colonel Avraham and Kalman Magan Champion, to the west of the canal? The first raft bridge construction was completed only on Saturday the 17th of October, after a series of battles east of the canal. The second raft bridge was completed on the morning of October 19th. Adan and Magan divisions crossed the canal through the first bridge, and break west was reinforced with the operation of the second bridge. After successful, Adan's division moved south, parallel to the canal, to encircle the Egyptian Third Army Protective Division deepen west, and also turn south to add a circle encircling the two. Make sure the perfect sighterm of Egyptian forces southern half of the canal seen on both sides. Other forces also incorporated share and moved to the west channel to expand to the north the Israeli penetration corridor on both sides of the canal towards Ismail. Observing the intensity of penetration of the Egyptian army into Lower Egypt, the Egyptian Chief of Staff demanded Saad al-Din Azaliah, Egyptian president, to withdraw at the Egyptian forces east of the canal, back to Egypt, to avoid the sidearm, prepare Cairo depth, and stopping protection IDF takeover over large areas in Egypt west of the canal. President of Egypt, Muhammad Anwar Sadat, did not respond to the demands of the Chief of Staff, and fired, and instead appointed his deputy Abdel Ghani Gems. Sadat turned to a cry of help to the Soviet Union, which put its forces on alert airborne flight to the Middle East. U.S. government informed the Soviet government that the NATO air forces will not allow Soviet airborne forces to the Middle East. U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger invited to Moscow by Soviet Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko, and the result of their talks was the decision of the UN Security Council for a cease-fire immediately on October 22. Despite all, the war continued for 2 more days and encirclement complete until October 24. Along with other binding decision of the Security Council cease-fire, the Soviet Union began to threaten that, if Israel did not remove the encirclement around the Third Army, Soviet transport aircraft will be operated from the air supply. Egyptian ruler understood that only the U.S. government can impose on Israel a waiver of the right. So do not hesitate to refer requests to the U.S. and get the conditions. Full diplomatic relations between Egypt and the U.S., Egypt closer to Western interests domain, while moving away from Soviet influence. U.S. pressure persuaded Israel to open a supply route for the Egyptian army encircled KM 101, on the road from Cairo to the city of Suez. Similar American treatment persuaded Israel to evacuate in January 1974 the IDF West Bank of the Suez Canal, 220 kilometers east of the channel, the first separation agreement, and in September 1975 an average distance of 60-50 kilometers from the canal, Suez, including giving Ras oil sources, arranged in Abu Rodas. However, leaving the Egyptian army outposts in the occupied east of the channel. Syria also renewed diplomatic relations with the United States and became the U.S. chief bridesmaid's IDF evacuation process in June 1974. The enclave occupied to Damascus since 1973 and Quneitra captured by the IDF in 1967. Iraq also renewed its relationship with the United States. Yom Kippur and the aftermath that followed, half a war of attrition, changed the Golan Heights and shorter canal scene, Suez. There were approximately 2,800 soldiers. Military plane IDF when the war ended. However, on the political left in Israel, and the loser, when Israel turns its forces on the Syrian front, all territory conquered during the Yom Kippur and Quneitra and the Egyptian front, not just from the territories conquered Lower Egypt, but also the Suez Canal and western Sinai. The main winner was American power, managed to put Egypt, and Syria and Iraq, to, and number 8203, the bosom of the West.